In the lively, colorful city of Zawina, life felt like a dream for Amina. She had a husband, Idris, who once looked at her like she was the only woman in the world, and she had Mariah, her best friend since they were little girls running barefoot through the market streets. Mariah wasn't just a friend, she was family. They had shared clothes, secrets, and laughter for years. Mariah had been there when Amina met Idris, cheering her on like a proud sister. She had stood beside her during the bridal fittings, helping her choose the perfect white lace gown. On Amina's wedding day, Mariah's eyes had filled with happy tears as she adjusted the veil and whispered, "You deserve the world, my sister." To Amina, it felt like she truly had it all. A home filled with love, a partner who promised forever, and a friend who would never let her fall. She didn't know it then, but this perfect picture she treasured so deeply was already starting to crack in places she couldn't see. For now she lived in the warm glow of trust and love, never imagining that the two people she cherished most would one day stand together on the other side of her pain. Mariah was there for everything in Amina's life, almost like her shadow, but one that brought warmth and comfort instead of darkness. From the first day Amina told her about Idris, Mariah's excitement was louder than anyone's. She would tease her saying, "Ah, my sister, you finally found the man who can keep up with your fire." When Amina started planning her wedding, Mariah was there at every fitting, holding her hand, laughing at the little mishaps, and adjusting the fabric on her dress like she was protecting something precious. On the wedding day, Mariah's smile was the brightest in the room. She held Amina's bouquet when she needed her hands free, fixed her veil before she walked down the aisle, and whispered words of courage in her ear. "You are glowing, my sister. Idris is the luckiest man alive." When Amina cried tears of joy during the vows, Mariah's own eyes shone as if she were the one getting married. In the years that followed, Mariah stayed close. She was at their home often, helping in the kitchen, sitting on the couch with Amina for late-night talks, sharing secrets they never told anyone else. She knew the sound of Amina's laugh, the look in her eyes when she was worried, and even the way she liked her tea. Sometimes Amina would think to herself how blessed she was to have both Idris and Mariah, two people she trusted with her whole heart. Mariah called Amina sister like it was a promise, and Amina believed it was. She never questioned the closeness between her best friend and her husband because in her mind, it was impossible for betrayal to grow in a place so full of love. She didn't know that sometimes the people you trust the most can stand right beside you, while holding the knife meant for your back. For now though, she saw only loyalty, and it wrapped around her like a blanket she thought would never be pulled away. At first, Amina didn't notice the change in Idris. Life in Zawina was busy, and running a household came with its own noise. But slowly little things began to shift. Idris, who once used to rush home just to have dinner with her, started coming late at night, saying he was buried in work. The evenings that used to be filled with laughter, long talks, and shared meals turned into lonely hours where Amina sat at the table staring at the untouched food, wondering if she should wait or eat alone. When she asked if everything was all right, Idris would smile faintly and say, "It's just business pressure, my love. Don't worry." His words were gentle, but his eyes no longer had that spark she once knew. He started taking more business trips, some lasting days, and sometimes when she called him, he wouldn't pick up right away. Amina tried to understand. She told herself that marriage had seasons, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, and this was just a cold patch. She convinced herself he was working hard for their future, for the life they had always dreamed about. She even defended him when relatives hinted that he seemed distant. But in her quiet moments when the house felt too big and too empty, her heart whispered questions she didn't want to hear. Why did he seem happier on his phone than when talking to her? Why did his smile fade so quickly when she entered the room? Still, Amina chose trust. She pushed away the worry and filled her days with chores, visits from Mariah, and memories of the man Idris used to be. She believed love could weather anything if you held on tight enough. What she didn't know was that some cracks don't just heal with time. Sometimes they grow deeper until they split the whole foundation apart. And while she was busy holding their life together with both hands, Idris was already letting go. It was during a lively family gathering at her aunt's house that Amina first felt something inside her shift. The air was filled with the smell of grilled fish and spicy jollof rice, children running around barefoot, and relatives laughing loudly over old stories. Idris was there too, talking with some uncles while Mariah floated around the room, chatting easily with everyone, her laughter ringing like a bell. Amina was carrying a tray of drinks when she passed by a small group of younger cousins huddled in the corner. She wasn't trying to listen, but a few words caught her ear and froze her in place. "Have you noticed how close Idris and Mariah have been lately?" one whispered. Another giggled softly, replying, "They're always together, even when Amina's not around." Her heart thudded in her chest. She stood there for a second, her hands tightening around the tray. The cousins went quiet when they noticed her nearby, exchanging quick glances before pretending to talk about something else. Amina forced a smile, pretending she hadn't heard a thing, but her mind was already racing. The rest of the evening felt different. Every time she glanced at Idris, she noticed Mariah wasn't far away, leaning in when he spoke, laughing at his jokes, her hand resting lightly on his arm as if it belonged there. Amina tried to tell herself it was harmless. After all, they had known each other for years, and Mariah had always been like family. Still, something about the way their eyes lingered on each other made her stomach tighten. When they got home that night, Amina said nothing. She lay awake beside Idris, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, wondering if she was just imagining things. But deep down, a quiet unease had settled in her chest, like the first drop of rain before a storm. She didn't know it yet, but those whispers were only the beginning of a truth that would soon break her heart in ways she could never have prepared for. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where Amina was busy in the kitchen, humming to herself while preparing Idris's favorite stew. She didn't hear him come in until his shadow fell across the doorway. When she turned, there was no warmth in his face, just a cold, unreadable expression. In his hand he held a brown envelope. Without a word, he placed it on the table in front of her. Her heart started to race. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Divorce papers," he said flatly, not even meeting her eyes. The room seemed to tilt. For a moment, Amina couldn't move. She wanted to ask why, to beg him to explain, but the lump in her throat made it impossible to speak. Idris didn't stay to answer questions. He turned and walked out, leaving her standing there with the envelope in her shaking hands. That night, she sat alone at the dining table, staring at the papers until her eyes blurred with tears. Every memory, every promise they had made, felt like it was being ripped to pieces. She thought of Mariah, her friend, her sister, and tried to believe it couldn't be about her. But 2 weeks later, the whispers became headlines. The whole city of Zawina buzzed with the news. Idris had married Mariah in a small but lavish ceremony. Photos of them smiling together spread like wildfire, their hands intertwined, looking like the perfect couple. People gasped, some in shock, others in cruel delight at the scandal. For Amina, it was more than betrayal, it was humiliation. The two people she had trusted most had not only taken her marriage but paraded it for the world to see. She felt stripped of her dignity, as if her life had been turned into entertainment for the city. That day, the world she had built collapsed, and all that was left was the sound of her own heart breaking. It wasn't only the betrayal that hurt Amina. It was the way the whole city of Zawina seemed to know about it, talk about it, and feed on it. Everywhere she went, she could feel the eyes on her. In the market, women who used to greet her warmly now lowered their voices when she walked past, their words dripping with pity. Some would shake their heads as if she were a tragedy they had read about in a newspaper. Others were not so kind. They whispered with mocking smiles, saying things like, "Imagine losing your husband to your own best friend." The hardest part was that she hadn't just lost Idris. She had lost Mariah too. This was the girl who had once fixed her veil on her wedding day, who had called her sister in front of everyone. Now that same woman was walking hand in hand with Idris, laughing in public like they had stolen something and were proud of it. It was everywhere. Photos of the new couple at events, Idris speaking with pride about his new beginning, and Mariah showing off her new life as if she had earned it. Amina couldn't escape it. Even her relatives, trying to comfort her, would say things that cut deeper without meaning to. "You're strong, Amina. You'll get over this," they would say, as if the betrayal was a small wound instead of a deep scar. Some days she didn't want to leave the house. She couldn't stand the stares, the whispers, the feeling of being the subject of a story she hadn't chosen to tell. At night, she lay awake replaying everything. Every smile Idris had given Mariah when she wasn't looking, every whisper she had ignored, every moment she thought her life was safe. The humiliation was heavy, pressing on her chest like a stone. But beneath the shame and the pain, something else was quietly growing. A small stubborn flame that refused to die. She didn't know it yet, but that flame would one day burn brighter than the darkness they had left her in. Amina decided there would be no screaming matches, no begging and no public scenes. She had already been made into a spectacle in Zawina, and she refused to give anyone more to talk about. One morning before the city was fully awake, she packed her clothes, a few personal belongings, and the small box of keepsakes she couldn't bear to leave behind. She didn't tell many people where she was going. Only her elderly mother and one trusted cousin knew. She boarded a bus heading south, her heart heavy but strangely calm. The road to Mbale was long, winding past green hills and wide open fields until the salty scent of the ocean began to fill the air. It was a small coastal town, nothing like the noisy, crowded streets of Zawina. The pace was slower, the faces friendlier, and the sea seemed to breathe life into everything. Amina rented a modest, whitewashed house just a short walk from the shoreline. It wasn't much, 2 small rooms, a kitchen with peeling paint, and a tiny porch, but when she opened the windows and felt the ocean breeze, it felt like freedom. At night, she could hear the waves rolling in, their steady rhythm soothing her in a way she hadn't felt in months. She kept to herself in those first weeks. She walked along the beach in the early mornings, letting the cold water touch her feet, watching the sun rise over the horizon. It was a quiet healing, not dramatic or quick, but real. The town didn't care about her past. Here she was just another woman starting over. Some nights the pain still came sharp and sudden, but in Mbale there was no audience for her grief. She could cry without shame, sleep without fear of waking to more humiliation. For the first time in a long while, Amina began to believe that maybe she could build a life that wasn't defined by betrayal, and that perhaps the silence she had chosen was not weakness, but the first step toward her strength. In Mbale, Amina knew she couldn't survive on savings forever, so she began looking for work. She walked into small shops, asked around at the market, and left her name with anyone who might have an opportunity. One afternoon, she noticed a busy export company by the docks. Ships were being loaded with crates of dried fish, cocoa, and handcrafted goods. The air was thick with the smell of the sea and the sound of workers shouting instructions. Something about the energy of the place drew her in. She walked inside and politely asked if they were hiring. That's how she met Mr. Kaloum, the company's owner. A tall, older man with sharp eyes but a warm smile. He asked her about her skills, and she spoke honestly about her years helping Idris with paperwork, contracts, and clients back in Zawina. He decided to give her a small trial job, arranging a shipment for a new client. Amina threw herself into the work. She read every document carefully, made calls, compared prices, and managed to secure a better deal than the company usually got. When the shipment was delivered smoothly and the client praised her, Mr. Kaloum was impressed. "You have a gift for this," he told her. From that day, her responsibilities grew. She began handling bigger negotiations, speaking with international buyers, and organizing schedules so efficiently that the company started making more profit. The workers respected her, and even the dockhands greeted her with friendly waves when she walked by. For the first time since leaving Zawina, Amina felt her confidence returning. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was proving to herself that she could stand on her own. Every successful deal reminded her that she was more than the woman who had been betrayed. She was smart, capable, and valuable. Sometimes late at night she would think about Idris and Mariah. But instead of tears, a quiet pride would rise in her chest. She was no longer the broken woman they had left behind. In Mbale she was Bill. One afternoon, after closing a big deal with an overseas buyer, Mr. Kaloum invited Amina to his office. He poured her a cup of tea and said, "You know, Amina, you're running half my operations already. Have you ever thought about starting your own company?" The thought took her by surprise. She had never imagined owning a business, not since her life in Zawina fell apart. But the way he said it, calm, confident, planted a seed in her mind. First she hesitated. Starting a company meant taking risks, and she had already lost so much. But Mr. Kaloum didn't let her doubt herself. He promised to guide her, introduce her to trusted suppliers, and even help her find her first clients. "You have the skill," he told her, "and you have the resilience. That is more valuable than money." With his mentorship, Amina registered her own logistics firm. She started small, one desk in a rented office space, a single phone line, and a notebook full of ideas. She worked tirelessly, contacting traders, negotiating transport deals, and making sure every shipment was handled with care. Slowly, word began to spread. Clients liked her honesty and efficiency. Soon, her company was moving goods from Bales docks to cities all over East Africa. The first time she saw her company name painted on the side of a cargo truck, she stood there smiling for a long time. It wasn't just a business. It was proof that she had rebuilt herself from nothing. Every deal she closed, every satisfied client, was a quiet victory over the people who had once thought she would never rise again. She no longer woke up feeling like the woman who had been betrayed in Zouina. She woke up as Amina, the business owner, the woman who could stand in any room with her head high. And though she never said it out loud, she knew that the life she was building now was worth far more than the one she had lost. This wasn't revenge, it was freedom. Back in Zouina, life for Idris was not the fairy tale he had imagined. At first, he and Mariah enjoyed the attention, the photos at parties, the lavish dinners, the whispers about them being the city's power couple. But soon the shine began to fade. Business deals that Idris had counted on started falling through. Clients who had once trusted him now hesitated to work with him, quietly saying they didn't like the way he had treated Amina. His company's profits began to shrink, and the stress showed in his face. At home, Mariah was not the partner he thought she would be. The easy laughter and sweetness she had shown before were replaced with sharp words and constant demands. She liked expensive things, dresses, jewelry, fancy trips, and when the money didn't flow like it used to, her smile disappeared. Arguments became their new routine. She accused him of not working hard enough. He accused her of being ungrateful. Rumors began to swirl in Zouina. People whispered that Mariah had been seen with other men when Idris was away, that she flirted openly at events, that maybe she had never truly been loyal to him. Idris tried to ignore it, but deep down, he knew she wasn't the kind of woman who would stand by him in hard times. The betrayal that Idris had once dealt to Amina was now knocking on his own door. Nights that were once filled with laughter turned into silence or shouting. He found himself drinking more, avoiding home, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. For the first time, Idris began to think about the life he had thrown away. The warm meals Amina used to cook, her calm voice during his worst business days, the way she had believed in him without question. But regret doesn't fix broken trust, and the woman he had left for another was slowly becoming a stranger he couldn't control. The empire he thought he was building was crumbling, and he had no one to blame but himself. The conference hall in the capital was buzzing with activity. Rows of stalls, banners hanging from the ceiling, the sound of deals being made in every corner. Idris was there, hoping to make new business contacts and maybe revive what was left of his struggling company. He moved from table to table, shaking hands, exchanging cards, trying to ignore the constant knot of worry in his stomach. And then he saw her. Across the room, Amina stood like she belonged to another world entirely. She wore a flowing indigo gown with gold embroidery that shimmered under the lights, the fabric draping elegantly over her shoulders. Her hair was perfectly styled, her posture confident, her smile warm yet commanding. She was surrounded by a small group of business leaders, all leaning in to hear her speak. Every now and then she laughed softly, and the people around her lit up as if they were in the presence of someone important, someone worth listening to. For a moment Idris just stared. This was not the broken woman he had left behind in Zouina. This was a woman who carried herself like she had the world in her hands. He noticed the way people treated her with respect, the way her name seemed to pass from one conversation to the next like she was a star of the event. His chest tightened with something he couldn't quite name. Pride, regret, maybe both. He remembered the days when she had stood beside him at business meetings, quietly supporting him. Now she didn't need anyone to stand beside her. Amina hadn't seen him yet, but Idris felt a sudden pull to walk over, to say something, anything. The truth was, he wasn't sure if she would even speak to him. Still, as he watched her from across the room, he knew one thing for certain. He had underestimated her, and now the distance between them felt wider than it ever had before. Idris waited until the crowd around Amina had thinned before walking toward her. His steps were slow, almost hesitant, like a man approaching a door he wasn't sure would open. She was standing near a display table, reviewing some documents with another businesswoman. When she looked up and saw him, her face didn't change. No surprise, no anger, just calm, unreadable composure. "Amina," he began. his voice softer than she remembered. He swallowed hard, the words sticking in his throat. I made a mistake. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look away. Instead, she met his eyes steadily, her voice even and measured. No, Idris. You made your choice. The words landed like a stone between them. He felt them cut deeper than any insult could. For a moment he wanted to argue, to explain how things had gone wrong with Mariah, how he had lost so much since she left. But he knew deep down that none of it would matter. She wasn't the same woman who used to fight to keep their marriage alive. You look different, he said quietly, almost in awe. I am different, she replied simply. I had to be. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it before excusing herself to speak with another group of business leaders waiting nearby. Idris stood there for a moment, watching her walk away with the same grace and confidence she had carried all evening. Around her, people leaned in when she spoke, eager to hear her opinions. For the first time, Idris understood that this wasn't a moment for reconciliation. It was a moment of realization. She didn't need him anymore. In fact, she never would again. And as much as he wanted to undo the past, he could see in her steady, unshaken expression that Amina's life had already moved far beyond the reach of his regrets. That evening, the grand hall of the conference was filled with the soft murmur of voices as people took their seats for the keynote speeches. When Amina's name was announced, the applause was immediate, echoing through the room. She walked to the podium in her indigo and gold gown, the lights catching on the embroidery, and paused for a moment, letting her eyes sweep across the audience. Her voice when she began was calm but strong, the kind that made people lean in to listen. She spoke about business, yes, but also about life. In this world, she said, loyalty is worth more than gold. It is the foundation of trust, and without it, even the strongest building will collapse. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. She told them how losing everything had once made her feel like she had no value left, but how she had discovered that self-worth does not depend on who stays in your life, but on who you decide to become. She never mentioned Idris or Mariah by name, but every sentence seemed to carry the shadow of that story. Betrayal, she said, is not the end of your story unless you allow it to be. You can choose to let it define you, or you can rise so high that it becomes nothing more than a chapter in your past. The room was silent, the kind of silence that comes when every person is holding on to each word. And when she finished, the applause was thunderous. Some people stood, clapping with tears in their eyes. A few even wiped their cheeks, touched by the quiet strength in her voice. Amina stepped down from the stage, her head high, her heart steady. In that moment, she wasn't just a businesswoman. She was a living example of what it meant to survive, rebuild, and shine brighter than the people who tried to dim your light. And for many in that room, her words would be carried home like a seed, planted deep in their own hearts. Here's a rewritten version in simple, emotional, and engaging style. Everyone in Zawina was talking about her, but not in the way they used to. They didn't whisper about her mistakes or the way she had been humiliated. Instead, they shared stories of her courage, her strength, and the way she had refused to let anyone keep her down. People remembered how she had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and public shame. Yet she had stood tall, her head held high, her spirit unbroken. Children pointed at her in the streets and said, "That's the woman who never gave up." Women in the market spoke about her as a role model, teaching each other that being hurt didn't mean staying small. Even those who had once judged her felt a quiet respect, realizing that true power came not from hurting others, but from rising after being hurt. Her story traveled like wildfire, carried by whispers, laughter, and awe, reaching every corner of the city. It reminded everyone in Zawina that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting up every single time, stronger than before. And slowly the city began to change just a little because of her example. People learned that compassion, resilience, and courage mattered more than pride or judgment. Her life became a living lesson. Humiliation can leave scars, but courage can leave a legacy. Zawina would never forget her, not as a victim, but as the woman who turned her pain into power and her story into hope. If you want, I can also make an even more viral, dramatic version that really grabs attention like a social media story. Do you want me to do that? Here's a rewritten version in simple, emotional, and engaging style. Amina walked out of the conference with her head held high, every step confident and calm. She didn't need to shout, argue, or take revenge to prove herself. Her success spoke louder than any words could. People watched her leave, realizing she had won in the most powerful way possible, with dignity. Her hard work, her courage, and her refusal to let bitterness control her had created a victory no one could take away. Inside, she felt a quiet joy, knowing she had stayed true to herself even when others had tried to break her. The whispers followed her, not with judgment, but with admiration. Women in the crowd caught her eyes and nodded, inspired to stand taller in their own lives. She had walked away from the past, from the hurt, and from the people who had doubted her, carrying nothing but her pride in her achievements. That day, Amina didn't just leave a conference. She left a message. She showed everyone that sometimes the strongest answer isn't revenge. It's walking away with your head high and proving your worth through your life. Her story would be remembered in Zawina for years. The woman who had been humiliated but refused to be broken. The woman who rose, shone, and walked away on her own terms. If you want, I can also make a slightly shorter, punchier version that hits harder for viral storytelling. Do you want me to do that?